Hey everyone, welcome back to Homeschool Voices. Today I have Rachel DeMille on. I'm so excited to chat with her. Her and her husband, Oliver DeMille, co-created the Thomas Jefferson Education model for homeschooling. They co-authored the bestselling The Phases of Learning book. And more recently, she has partnered with her daughter, Emma Cox, to create a subscription-based coaching platform for pre-scholar children and their parents. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm so excited to chat with you and share your ideas with everyone. And, reading your book, The Phases of Learning, really changed my approach to homeschooling and even like parenting.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's really simple ideas, but they were revolutionary to me. And that's why I'm really excited to share what you have to say with everybody listening.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's just start. As if all that wasn't enough, and 30 years, I think 30 years in this space isn't enough. Let's just sort of start with who you are as an individual homeschooling mom. Like, how many kids do you have? How old are they? Let's just start with that.
I have 8 children. The oldest is 32, I think. No, 31. He's 31. And the youngest is 17. 4 of my children are married and have kids of their own. So we've got 10 grandkids and another one due next month. 4 of my kids are single. One of those has profound disabilities. He'll be with us and, for the duration. 2 of my kids have, pronounced dyslexia. Several of my grandkids are extremely precocious, as in, scary gifted, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I've got kids that are traditional learners. I've got kids that are unschooling learners. We've got the whole Megillah. I was a person who I was precocious myself. I was reading very early and playing the piano and all of that stuff. And my husband, well, a genius in his own right, had, I think, the dyslexic stuff going on, and he didn't read effectively, independently until he was probably 11. And so we're quite a mixed bag, but an interesting conglomeration in our family. And so a lot of times I hear people say, well, yeah, I love the things that you say, but it's easy for you because ... And I'm here to say, I don't think it's hard for me because I love what we do, but I don't think it's easy for anybody, no matter what your advantages or challenges. I think we all have to be in that space where we wonder if we're doing enough, and we wonder what we're supposed to do next. And that's just the parenting gig. That's not even the homeschooling gig. That's you've got a kid. That's kind of where your head has to go, where you constantly reevaluating, am I still in the right rhythm? What's the next right thing? And I think that that's kind of why we came up with leadership education, because it gives principles and structure and form and vision that allow for that personalization, and not only that demand that personalization in order to achieve your ideals.
Nice. And so where would you say, give us an idea? We're going to go into the details of everything, but let's start with the end and then work backwards. So how are your kids now? Like, just give me some idea of the results that people can expect.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome sample size that you have.
My kids are the best advocates for homeschool and the best argument for leadership education, for TJEd, that you can imagine. My oldest, who's one of the dyslexic kids, is just such a genius. He has not been held back by his, if you had looked at him at 8 and 10 and 12, you would think of him as developing slowly or having, issues with his academic progress. But at 31, I'm here to tell you, you would not think that, because he is a genius. He's profoundly effective in his own mentoring for others. He's very well read. He's an entrepreneur. He works in a family business, but his wife's family business, and they have him, take on some responsibilities of leadership and stuff. And he's an amazing father, amazing husband. He's just a delightful person. So that's my oldest. I'm not going to go through all 8 of them because we don't have that much time, but I really could. Okay. But I will tell you that my second is my third daughter works for me. She works in TJEd. She handles our customer service and stuff. But our second daughter She and her husband are partners now in leadership education, and they have spearheaded a program for youth called TJEd High. That is, it just knocks your socks off. You see the pizzazz, the passion, the effectiveness. They're so to hear these kids talk, you know that they love their life, they love their family, and they have a sense of purpose that drives them to be excellent. And it's right down the line. In fact, we've guested at many conventions where all or most of my kids have sat on a panel to answer questions about adult homeschooled kids. And it's always a favorite thing. It's wonderful on this end of it. Let me just say that. It's delightful at this end of it.
Very good. Very good. So it all works out well.
Yep. It ends the story. Well, it's not ending. It's now we're opening new chapters with the grandkids coming up. Our oldest grandkid is 8 and our youngest is 2 months old. And we got, like I say, another one coming. So stay tuned.
Do all of your children, do they all homeschool?
They do. They do.
I feel like that's impressive.
Yeah. Well, they love their life. Their best friends are their siblings, and they just draw other people into that circle and just share that love for life and that love for mission. So it's really kind of a special thing.
That is. Question for you. Were you homeschooled as a kid? Did you go to public school, private school?
I went to public school, start to finish. I did attend shortly at a private university, but it's a known one. You wouldn't even think of it as private, I think. Like I said, I showed early giftedness in a lot of things, and school was very easy for me right up until, I want to say, high school. At that point, the way they graded you changed. Mm-hmm. It had to do with seat time. It had to do with, did you fill out this checklist? Did you complete that writing journal? Did you whatever? There was a lot of things that kind of, I think, evened the playing field so that people who gave a lot of effort could still get the A, even though they couldn't test well. Whereas I could test all of that stuff and more in the highest percentages and still get terrible grades because I was just too busy doing the things that were important to me. And even though I meant to and really wanted to and felt terrible about myself for not measuring up, I just never could make myself do it. And
I mean, my husband was the same way. He got terrible grades in high school and then got all A's in college. And I think a lot of people are like that. So, okay. So this is interesting to me. So you grew up going to public school, and I think that most of us did. And as with everything in life, we have this mental framework of what something looks like, and it's based off of our experiences in life. So I want to know, how did you go from like public school framework? Because most people who are watching this, they're probably recently pulled their kids out of public school. There's such an explosion in homeschooling. There's so many new homeschoolers, and their mental framework is from their experience, which is public school, and very current, and I kind of want to help them see things the way that you see things. So how did you get from essentially a public school framework of this is what school looks like to the model that you developed?
Well, a couple of things, I would say 3 things really. One is because of my mindset of really being governed by my gut and my values. That's what really held me back in high school. It actually set me free in homeschool. So even when the voices would nag and the fears would come along, I could still only do what felt right. What seemed, the hotter, colder game, right? I would just lean into what felt right, even though I was scared. So that's thing 1. Thing 2, I have a sister just older than me. She's 4 years older, and she married youngish. She was 21. I didn't marry till I was 25. So I had 8 years of watching her and her family grow. And they homeschooled from the start. He was a professional educator, and he taught, in public school, and then later opened a private school. And watching their family culture, the dynamic of how their homeschool informed their relationships, I was like, I want that. And I had a similar experience with another family. My husband was visiting speaker at a school in San Diego when we were just getting started. My oldest, I think, might have been 3. And we were stayed over at the home of a family that participated in this school, and it was just sort of for their youth. They homeschooled all the kids except for some enrichment at this school that they were a part of. But I saw the way this family interacted. And not only were they smart and fun and interesting and all of those things that we hope our kids will be, but these 5 sisters would sit on this, what do you call those things? The pit, the sectional couch, right?
Yeah.
They would sit in this sectional couch and drape over each other like a litter of puppies and just sit there, like braiding each other's hair and I don't know, just talking and laughing. And I thought, these are teenage girls inhabiting the same space, like there's nowhere they would rather be. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I want that. So I saw my sister with her little kids, and I saw my friend Sherry with her big kids. And I'm like, something's up. These are both homeschooling families. And I said to Sherry, how do I have what you have? And she said, Rachel, don't sweat it. You're going to have it.
Yeah.
And she's right. It worked. Doing the things that came natural to me and that we have codified into leadership education lead to that type of family culture. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is my husband, who again had the great expectations. He started out as this really smart kid that everybody had all these high hopes for, but somewhere along the line it became apparent that he wasn't learning to read, and it was a real struggle. I'll give the long story short is he overcame that hurdle with amazing parental support and the freedom to let his brain work it out in the way he needed to. And he got to where he was graduating from high school with all of these honors, like literally a page long in the community newspaper of all of the scholarships that had been offered him. West Point, Air Force Academy, all of the big universities in the state, and money from this business and that business. He really did become the epitome of success in public school. But deep in his heart, he had this nagging sense of imposter syndrome, I guess you say. Yeah. You know how sometimes we feel like you have those dreams where you wake up in a blanket at school and you're like, oh no, where's my clothes? He had that sense that he had done everything right and more. He had exceeded all the expectations, but he didn't feel like an educated man. He felt like he had missed something. And he's like, well, okay, I'll just go to college and I'll fix it there. And partway into his college career, he realized, got this sort of sick to his stomach feeling, it's happening again. I'm doing all the things right. I'm the university president's 2 scholarships. I'm one of them. And yet I don't feel like I'm getting an education to match my mission. I don't feel
That's how I felt as well.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so through some other connections, he had been learning some things from a guy who did seminars through a friend, and ultimately approached this man and said, would you mentor me? And not too long into that mentoring process, he realized this was what he had been looking for. This man understood what he was capable of and was further down the path on that goal, and challenged him and helped him to see his flaws, helped him to expand into areas where he had allowed himself to be weak. And he was on an Air Force scholarship at the time. He was in the leadership training program. And when he went to summer camp, just the summer before he was to graduate, he had some health struggles, and the Air Force is really not very patient with that. If they can't just fix it, they boot you, which is what they did. So here he had been 4 years, his school paid for by the Air Force, in addition to the other scholarships that were paying his way. They said, thank you very much, goodbye. And so now here he was, 3.5 years of school under his belt, and realizing, I don't know what's next. And so he sat down and said, what do I want? What feels right? And what felt right, crazy enough, he dropped out of college with like 11 credits left and went full-time mentoring with this man. And it changed everything. And, his story is amazing and awesome, but that's the foundation of who we are and where we came from. For us, education isn't just the reading, writing, arithmetic. It isn't just measuring up so that you're not behind your peers. There's this aim of, we were each born with genius inside, and we were all born with a purpose. Mm-hmm. And it's written on our hearts. And sometimes we snuff that, we stuff it, we ignore it, or it's like, wrestled out of us by the system or by expectations or learning to comply, but it's there.
Yeah.
And the world is a richer place when we get an education to match our mission. And we are poorer. Our relationships suffer. Our self-esteem suffers. Our level of success and happiness suffer when we ignore that sense of purpose. And go ahead.
I would say I love where you're going with this, because you're focusing on all the amazing things about homeschooling. And so with all the people fleeing the public schools, I think they're fleeing something.
Right.
And they have no idea all of these amazing, wonderful things, that you're talking about. They're just trying to get away from all the bad. And this is a wonderful discussion, because they're going to see all of the amazing things, that they have in store.
Well, homeschool, like you're saying, is not just not public school.
Right.
And hopefully it's not public school, because a lot of times I think we bring it home and that's our default position. It's like, I've taught a lot of teenagers to drive, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah,
and when you got a new driver and you're merging onto the freeway, when they get nervous at that semi truck coming toward them, you know what they do?
No.
They hit the brake.
I'm so scared.
Right? You're like merging at 65 and he's coming at 85. If you hit the brake, that's doom. Right? But that's what we do. We're in this rush of momentum. It almost feels like free fall, and we get nervous and we stop. We want to go back to the place that's comfortable.
Yeah.
But you know what? I got to tell you, when you let go of the need to please those voices that honestly shouldn't get a vote, when you let go of the need to measure up to a standard that is so uniform to be like literally insignificant, when you let those things go and just listen to the child, look in their eyes, know what you know, because you know things. When you inhabit that space, it's not scary. There's a peace, there's a joy, there's a sense of direction that really take you on a journey that you just don't want to miss.
So this perfectly leads me into my next question, which was, if you didn't feel like an educated person with doing so well in high school, doing great in college, what does it mean to be educated? And what is the purpose of it? Why are we doing this as parents? Why are we educating our kids? Why should we continue to educate? We'll get into that, because that's like a whole part of your philosophy. Why should we continue to educate ourselves? What's the purpose of it? Why? And what does it mean? What does it look like?
Well, I'd like to tweak your question just a little bit.
Okay, tweak it.
Because what I hear, there's a subtext there that I hear from so many parents, which is they have this sense of, I'm doing my best and this is all I know, but my children deserve better than this. And how can we propose to give our children an experience that we haven't had for ourselves?
Yes.
And you sort of touched on it, how we make a big deal of leading out, valuing your own process of continuing your education. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert in anything in particular. What matters is really the trajectory. I know we've all had that teacher who knew everything about the subject and we could not care less what they had to say, right? Because they were boring, they were disengaged, they didn't care who we were, they just had a test that we were supposed to pass. Like, how is that supposed to transform me as an individual? And why am I ever going to care about that stuff? On the other hand, one of the most inspiring things in the world is to see somebody, it's the hero story. It's that person who's fragile, who's afraid, who's got all these disadvantages, and yet somehow they find a way to triumph. And triumph sometimes is a very small thing, but the story of the convert, the story of the underdog, those are the things that are transformational. They are inspirational. And we as parents are completely within our power to be that guy. And we don't even want to be the other guy. So what are our choices? If we can just be in that place where we hear our heart and we own our role as self-educators, whatever that means. It might mean 3 minutes on the toilet with a poem, because that's all the time you get in the day. And you've got a book of poetry right there. You know what? That counts. Or listening to audios, or the stuff that you read with your kids. Those things count. And hearing your heart, maybe clearing your life of some of the things that you hate and adding in 2 that give you a spring in your step, that lift your spirits, that give you a sparkle in your eye. Do you love walking on grass barefoot? Do you love painting with oils? Whatever. Bring something back into your life that moves your heart. As soon as you give yourself permission to be who you were meant to be, it's like it leavens. It's like that little bit of yeast that infects your whole family culture. As soon as you say, I matter, that voice inside me matters, what I was born to be matters. Not only does that transform you into a more joyful parent and a more inspirational parent, but all of a sudden the messaging is to the child, I matter, what's inside of me matters, what I'm for matters. And I don't care what else they did or did not learn. If they mastered that lesson, you're on a good place. And if you master the testing and not that, that's like a lesson in mediocrity and futility. You're late for what important date? You got there, but what is that? And why do you care?
And I completely agree with you. It's funny. I was reading for like, I think the 3rd time now, John Taylor Gatto's Weapons of Mass Instruction.
Yeah.
And, there's some similar, some agreement, I think some disagreement. And I was reading and I was trying to define, like, based on what he's saying, like, what does it mean? Then what does it mean to be educated? Like, what is the purpose? And time again, he gives examples of people who in his mind are not schooled, but they're educated. He draws a distinction. And for him, it really seems to boil down to, I don't know if this is fair or not, but it really does seem to boil down to, they found their life experience. To be educated means a string of life experiences that leads a person to be able to financially care for themselves. So if they have financial success and they are effective in life, then they are educated. And it doesn't have to mean that they are book smart necessarily. It's just whatever led them down that path. If they have success at the end, then they are educated. Would you agree with that? Is the purpose of education to have a job and to make money, or is there kind of more to it than that?
I totally disagree with it. I mean, I love all of his argumentation. I think it's a few rungs below the ideal. Mm-hmm. And I think when you shoot for the ideal, you're almost always going to exceed that goal.
And then what's the ideal though?
For me, the ideal is living your mission.
Okay.
Were you born to heal the sick? Were you born to comfort the lonely? Okay. Free the captive? Were you born to spread beauty, to create wealth? What are you for?
And which isn't necessarily just making money.
And for most people, being effective in, society and being able to interact with the economy is a given. For some few, it's not. I have, as I mentioned, my son who's profoundly disabled. He's almost certainly never going to meet that standard that Gatto set of being able to care for himself financially. Mm-hmm. And yet he is absolutely nailing his mission. He is just slaying it. I'll tell you one example.
I would love that. That would be good.
He was in the hospital after a revision on his hip because of some brain damage. He has some neurological haywiring, and it causes his muscles to contract in ways that he can't control. And it was causing one of his hips to pull out of its socket. And that's very painful, as you might imagine, where to have that constant strain on the hip. And it's also, very damaging to the bone socket. So they went in and did a revision on his hip so it could hold in place. And while he was in the hospital recovering from this fairly major surgery, a woman brought him a tray of food. And he said to her in his funny little voice, "Oh, I love food. Thank you so much." And he has language processing issues. So he doesn't always converse in real time because he has a processing delay and stuff. But in that moment, he was able to give words. I'm going to say I bet that person meets up with lots of kids who are sad and grumpy and blamey or nonverbal or heartbreaking in one way or another. But for her to walk into that room and have my Hiram say to her, "Thank you so much. I love food." He made her week, I guarantee you. And I have heard stories like that from all the people who have had part in his care and his development. He is the one that makes it so they can keep going with the harder ones. I mean, he's hard in his own way, but he goes to an afternoon program with a bunch of kids with autism. And sometimes they're violent, sometimes they're frightening. But he's the one that can reach out and knit a group together and just show love. And he's challenging in his own ways. He's not like a perfect angel, I promise you. He's a little bit frightening at times too, but he is living his mission. And his people love their job in large part because of him. So Gatto, I wish you were alive for me I bet you would rewrite that chapter if you knew Hiram.
Yeah, I just always wonder, I mean, for me, I would tend to agree with you that you have to discover who you are. And, but for me, it involves a lot. I mean, for me, reading is a very important aspect of it. And because there's so many, the reason why there's so many ideas and books, that's really what it boils down to, that you have to wrestle with. And
I think that's true. And I also think it's because in the classics, you come face to face with greatness.
Yeah. You
get to, a lot of us don't aspire to things because we never even consider them. So like if anything that we say here today is new to some people, all of a sudden lights go on and like, oh, and they get to decide, how does that apply to me? But if they don't listen to this conversation, maybe that doesn't happen, right? That happens over and over and over and over again in the classics. We are exposed to ideas, as you said, but not just ideas, but stories and characters. We get to live vicariously these challenges and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe she made that choice, or oh, I would never, or what would I do if? And we get to live all of these scenarios on the hero's journey, the tragedies, the failures, the turnarounds, the successes, the absolute triumphs. And we get to inhabit that mindset with the author, with the character, with our family. Those read alouds, oh my goodness. In fact, we have a product called Mentoring the Classics, where what we do is every single month we have a title and family members read it. My husband does an audio. It's Mentoring in the Classics. Yeah. My husband does an audio introduction to that title. And then at the end of the month, family members come together and we discuss that title. And we are starting now our 10th year in January of doing this. And you get to watch my kids grow up in this process. And I've had so many people say, I get read and discuss the classics, but I never really understood it until I heard your family do it. And so there's another thing where you have to kind of taste it.
Nice.
To know how it is for you.
And I think when a lot of people hear this, it makes sense. Like, yeah, great, good, I'm going to do that. But they're still implementing this public school at home thing. And then they have baseball or basketball or something in the afternoon. And like, when do they ever read a book? For example, with us, we've done literature-based education always, except for like a year and a half when I joined a charter in California. And they push you in a certain direction. And I said, well, if they're going to push me in a direction, I will leave. And I did. But for a while, we started getting a little schooly with stuff. And I realized that my kids had not really read books, hardly, other than we continued to read aloud to them. We were still reading aloud to them, but they didn't read their own. And I thought, man, this is not good. So it all sounds like it makes perfect sense. Oh, the classics, and let's read and let's discuss. But if you're never reading books, then that doesn't happen. So you have to have a framework that allows it.
To me, that's like the difference between a garden tomato and a store-bought tomato. If you've ever tasted garden fresh from a tomato, they look almost the same as the ones at the store, but they don't taste anything like it. Strawberries do the same thing. Literally, apples do the same thing. It may look like it and may sound like it, but it doesn't taste like it. And in fact, one time I was reading a book with my daughters. I used to read to my two youngest every single night on my bed. And we got through one and then picked up one that had been talked about by a lot of people. And we started to read it. And the girls were kind of fidgety. They were kind of looking at each other. And partway in, they're like, I realized, I'm like, aren't you enjoying this? They're like, no, you can tell me, it's fine. We don't have to read this. And my daughter, America, said, it just doesn't taste right. And she was right. It was kind of brain candy. And I don't have any particular argument with brain candy. There's a place for it. But it was telling that my daughters knew the difference. And when we live a life of what you said, jumping through the hoops and ticking off the checklists, we are missing out on the real stuff. Because I tell you what, almost everything that you learn on those checklists, you can get off your phone.
Yeah. Or just from living, for a few more years.
But the things that it's not about information. It's about transformation. That's what education is. It's supposed to take you from one place to another. It's not supposed to just fill you with factoids. And that's, I think, what learning to the test too often does. We have kids who sometimes thrive in that situation and learn to find their mentors and reach beyond it. But for a majority of kids, it just really underserves them. And not only that, but it absorbs their time and energy, like you've described, so that they don't have that disquieting feeling of, what should I read now? Like you got to be bored. You got to be frustrated. You got to own that autonomy. You got to have that moment where you say, I have to pick something. What am I supposed to do now? And if we fill their time and their space with all these things, they never become a self-educator.
Exactly. So there has to be some sort of structure and framework. So that brings me into sort of the second part of the interview, where we kind of go into more of the details. So our